back to my series that I'm calling Breaking Apostolic. This is the second video in this series. For those of you that are new here, my last video just kind of lays the foundation of what exactly Apostolic Pentecostal is, what they believe and practice. In this video, I'm going to talk about what my personal experience was like. And I have recorded and re-recorded this video over and over again because I sometimes struggle to find the words to say that properly convey my experience and what I went through. So yeah, here it goes. So I'm going to start off light. And as the video goes on, I'm going to dig into some deeper experiences. So, what was it like growing up in the Apostolic Pentecostal church? It was something, and by something I mean awful. First off, literally your whole life is church. We spent so much time at church. The first church that I went to growing up, we had church twice on Sundays. We went to Bible study on Tuesdays. We had church again on Thursdays. And then we also would frequently have revivals, not only at our church, but we would attend other churches' revivals. And then the second church that I went to in kind of like my adolescence, we had church twice on Sundays, once on Wednesdays, and then, like I said, we would go to other churches' revivals and events, and our own revivals and events, and then also like youth group events and all of that. Basically, my whole life was church, and whenever I wasn't at church, my whole life had to be centered around church, or things that God would deem appropriate. And there was a very long list of things that were not deemed appropriate. Apostolic Pentecostal is a very legalistic religion, and if you don't adhere to every single part of that, then you're not saved. And the rigid restrictions were something that I hated ever since childhood. Growing up, all I ever wanted was to just be a normal kid, but being normal was out of the question for me, and I hated it. I hated that I couldn't wear pants, that I couldn't wear jewelry, that I couldn't play with makeup, that I couldn't change my hair color or cut my hair, that I couldn't celebrate Halloween or watch Harry Potter or play with Pokemon, that I couldn't go to the movies with my friends or go to water parks, and 90% of what was on the TV I couldn't watch, and 90% of music I couldn't listen to. And it's because you're supposed to be separate from the world. You're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world. So you're very separated from the world and the things of the world. And I actually went to public school. My family could not afford to send me to private school, so I just went to public school. And I was bullied severely in school. Partially because I was not a very cute kid. I know that's a big part of it, but also partially because people viewed me as a freak, like even in the Bible Belt. If that's telling you just how intense the Apostolic Pentecostal religion is, that even people in the Bible Belt view you as a weirdo. And my parents made me feel like this was just kind of the price that I had to pay for having the truth. That I was persecuted by my peers because I had something that they didn't. So at first I didn't have a lot of friends outside of church, and I grew up feeling very ostracized. And to an extent, I was a little bit ostracized. I was kind of separated because of that whole kind of separate from the world piece. And when I got older, my parents kind of looked for any reason to cut me off. They would look for reasons to ground me for the stupidest things, and take away my phone or my laptop or my privileges in order to keep me on like a very short leash, which my parents did. I did not have a lot of privileges or freedom growing up, especially when I was a teenager. And because I hated all the things that I couldn't do, and because people saw me as a freak, it really made me resent how I was being raised. And that resentment led to feelings of guilt. And when you feel resentment towards the commandments of God, you're taught that it's because your heart's not right, and that you just need to give yourself to God. So then I would give myself over to the Lord, and I would feel so lucky to have this special truth that nobody else has, because they believe that nobody other than Apostolic Pentecostals are the ones that are truly saved. And this vicious cycle of resentment and guilt and salvation continued over and over again. And it was exhausting emotionally and mentally, especially for things that were totally normal and okay. I was taught that these normal desires aren't okay and that they're full of these demonic spirits. You shouldn't be enticed by them, and if you're enticed by them, then you need more of God. That kind of mentality also caused problems, because whenever you resent God's commandments, you're told that the reason why you don't desire those things is because your heart's not right. You're blaming the individual for not giving enough, not being enough. And whenever you're constantly feeling guilt and like you're not worthy or you're not good enough and something is inherently wrong with you, you develop a very low self-esteem. And so then when you have this skewed idea of yourself as not being worthy, and you're taught that you just don't have your heart right, you need to keep giving yourself to the Lord, it just really fucks with you in a way that I don't even know how to explain. Whenever you're a young kid that feels guilty for very normal things, and it's a deeply rooted guilt that's fueled by fear. Fear of upsetting God, fear of going to hell, fear of demonic spirits taking hold of you, fear of the devil ruining you in your life. And I think that that's what's especially awful about the Apostolic Pentecostal movement, and just the absolute fear that they instill in their followers, including very, very young children, is traumatizing. I was taught from a young age that all these things had demonic spirits. I was taught that scary movies had demonic spirits, and the reason why we weren't allowed to go to the movie theater was because they showed scary movies at the movie theater. So the demonic spirits from the scary movies were at the movie theater, and if we went there, they could attach to us and follow us home. And this just really scary for a small child to be taught those things, to be taught that everything has demonic connotations and everything is going to send you to hell. It's very scary for a kid. And they make this spiritual realm very, very real, not only for the demonic spirit side of it, but for the angelic side of it. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a church service where people become slain in the spirit. And I would really suggest you watch some videos, because this was what a lot of the church sermons that I went to were like, where people are speaking in tongues and running around the church and rolling on the floor until they're blue in the face and screaming and crying, and it is very intense. And whenever you bring young, impressionable children into that, and you teach them that that is normal and that is okay, and that it's a very good, positive thing from the spiritual angelic realm, something that you need in order to go to heaven, and nobody else is right if they don't participate in this, it makes the spiritual realm very real. And that was especially difficult for me because now that I'm an adult, I know that I have an anxiety disorder. And I don't know if I have an anxiety disorder because of genetics or because of the way that I was raised, or maybe it's a combination of both. But what I do know is that anxiety combined with the way that I was raised just made all of that more difficult and even more intense for me. Because the way that I respond to fear is so intense and sometimes very irrationally intense. Growing up in that kind of environment of fear all the time, having an anxiety disorder really was not good for me. And now that I know I have an anxiety disorder, I can look back on things that I did as a kid and realize just how abnormal they were. Just the sight of a school bus would practically have me throwing up. I would be sick every morning in the bathroom before school because I was afraid to go to school because kids were mean to me. And I would have my mom cut my fingernails, and I would make my parents pray while I was getting my fingernails clipped because I had this irrational fear of fingernail clippers. And that irrational fear of getting my finger clipped. And it's all of the behavior that I exhibited was so obviously not normal. But of course, I wasn't taken to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist because any sort of mental abnormality was viewed as a demonic spirit or a lack of closeness to God. And I'll dive more into that later. Growing up in a religion, in a household full of demonic spirits and fear of so many things and fear of going to hell affected me very deeply and very negatively. I read an article once written by someone who grew up Apostolic Pentecostal and left the movement. And I have to quote it because it describes it so perfectly. We believed we followed the Spirit, but really, we lived in fear. And that's what life was for me. I lived in fear, and I lived in resentment, and I lived in deep guilt. And when you combine all of that with emotional and mental abuse from your family, it just sends you to a really dark place. And this got especially intense once I reached adolescence. Even though my parents controlled what I listened to at home, and they regularly checked my MP3 player to ensure that it had only Christian music on it, they could not control what I listened to when I was at school on my friends' iPods. And I fell in love with punk rock music. And that was literally the worst thing ever to my parents, because rock music is the devil's music. But no matter what my parents did or said, they couldn't stop me from loving this music and listening to it and wanting to emulate the aesthetics of the bands that I listened to and hanging out with people that also listened to and loved this music. And it was the first time in my life that I felt truly connected and accepted and not judged by a group of people. Because even when you're in the Apostolic Pentecostal church and you all believe the same thing, it's different. You're constantly judged by others, and especially if you don't accept all of the parts of the religion. It's a very all or nothing religion. You're just constantly under scrutiny, and people are always judging you because of the legalistic aspects of the religion. So it was genuinely the first time I had ever felt accepted and not judged by an entire group of people, and I felt so connected. And it was a great feeling, so there was literally nothing they could do to make me ever give that up. So my parents resorted to tearing me down and attempting to control those actions by way of fear. They would cut me down all the time for not loving the Lord and for desiring things of the world and following down a path of unrighteousness that was going to lead me to hell. And we fought all the time. And I remember one particular fight one night that got really bad. We were fighting about punk rock music, of course, and I had had enough of listening to them cut me down, and it was a school night, so I just went to bed. But they weren't done, so they followed me to my room. They continued to yell at me while I was laying in the bed, just trying to be left alone and go to sleep, and my stepdad grabbed me by my ankles and shook me while telling me, "You're going to be a useless gutter whore, pregnant and strung out on drugs by the time you're 16. And I just looked up at him, tears streaming down my face, and I said, "You're scaring me." And I was only a middle schooler, like 13 years old, being told that I was going to be a loser, essentially. My parents never touched me like that ever again. But the verbal abuse never stopped. And the mental abuse never stopped. My mother would verbally berate me to the point that I would have a literal mental breakdown and then call me a demon for it. Because I was so heavily weighed down with negative things like fear and resentment and guilt and feeling unworthy, not only did I feel that way from my religion, but I felt that way by how my parents treated me. And due to all of the abuse, which wasn't even viewed as abuse because they were just trying to fight for my salvation and do what's best for me. And I sunk to the lowest point I had ever been. I saw myself as deplorable and useless. I saw the world and life as very cruel and dark, and I saw my future as bleak and pointless. And I battled with suicidal thoughts because I saw no value in myself as a person, nor in life in general. And one day I was home alone, and I pulled out a kitchen knife. I sat on the kitchen floor and I was going to slit my wrist. I wanted so badly to never be forced to live another second, but I didn't, because I was taught if you kill yourself, you go to hell. So I just continued to live in my own personal hell, praying to God that something horrible would happen to me. I would pray to die in a car accident all the time. I couldn't come forward about these suicidal thoughts and wishes for death. And because you aren't allowed to go to professionals for help, I would just be told to give myself over to the Lord. I would be looked at as having a demonic spirit inside of me, and that the way to fix that is to get your heart right with God. I knew I was going to cry. And as I got older, I started to see the things that my parents taught me as ridiculous. And I started to see the way that they treated me as wrong. I continued to feel resentment because my parents took a part of my life that I'll never get back. So I still felt resentful, but I no longer felt guilt for normal things, like watching Harry Potter with my nanny or putting on mascara at a friend's house. I didn't feel guilty for those things anymore because I knew there was no reason to feel guilty for those things. And I tried to find value in myself and in my life and in my future, despite what my parents had said to me and despite what I was raised in. That was what my experience was like. The whole purpose of this video was to hopefully reach people who have been where I've been or are currently there. Anyone watching this that understands. I just want you to know that you're not crazy. The way that you're being treated is wrong. You do not deserve it, and it's not okay. It's not okay, and people need to know about it. So, yeah, I ended up not crying nearly as much the fourth time I've recorded this video, so pretty proud of myself. So I guess that's where I'm ending this video. Note to self, do not record while the sun is going down because my room has gradually gotten darker over this video. I've tried to supplement with other lights, but yeah. Stay tuned for my next video where I am going to discuss why I left the Apostolic Pentecostal movement and what happened after I left. If you have anything you'd like me to address that I did not, feel free to leave a comment down below. See ya.